Well, in the midst of the pandemic and trying to come up with things to try and inspire us and to enlighten us, today I thought I'd add a new segment called Priests and Saints of the Passion and Eastertide. We're going to focus more on the saint part, but the priest part, especially as we celebrate Holy Week, Holy Thursday, the commissioning, the calling to orders of priests, I thought it'd be nice maybe to remember some special priests. And if you can see, I'm wearing an apron today, and this apron says Passiontide. That means Father Andrew. And I'd like to remember today in our prayers Father Andy Palaha. Father Andy Palaha was a priest of our diocese. He was born in Allentown, was ordained by Bishop Msgr in 1965 at our cathedral in Allentown. And his first assignment as a young priest, as a newly ordained priest, was at the former St. Mary's here in St. Clair, where he was here for a year, and then he taught at Marion for a while. Then he went up to Shenandoah, and then he went down to Lehigh Valley, and then he was at Reading, and then back to Allentown. And in 1984, Father Andy was named pastor of Immaculate Conception Church over on Deaners Hill here in St. Clair. It was here that I met Father Andy for the very first time. I was ordained in 1984, and as many pastors are wont to do, 40 hours were still very big at the time when I was ordained, and everybody was looking for new preachers. And so it was Immaculate Conception's 40 hours time, and Father Andy Palaha called me and said, excuse me, would you mind, or would you be interested in preaching our 40 hours here in St. Clair? And with a smile I said yes, never meeting Father Andy at all. I came down from my assignment, my first assignment in '84 up in Monte City. We hit it off right away. A very kind man, a very compassionate man, a man who loved his parishioners down at Immaculate Conception, got along with them very well, and you could also see that they loved him. About 1992, Father Palaha was transferred up to Immaculate Conception in Slatington, and that's the church now where our very own Father Eric Garneau, another native son here of St. Clair, is currently the pastor of. It was almost immediately after getting up to Slatington that Father Palaha was diagnosed with cancer. And from my experiences with him, going to visit him for those years of my young priesthood over on Deaners Hill, I would also go up to visit him. And once again, there was something that I think we forget about today. The kindness, the compassion of priests. And that was Father Palaha to a T. The other unique thing about Father Palaha was just the fact that he was just a plain old simple genuine guy. There was nothing unusual about him. There was nothing extraordinary, but he was out to do his mission for the love of God, and a very holy man. And so when I took over as pastor here of St. Clair of Assisi, with one of the parishes making up St. Clair of Assisi being immaculate, as I was going through the rectory, I found this apron. And this was an apron that the people of the parish went and gave to him, because at that time Immaculate Conception was really, really big. Really big on their block parties. They were an extremely active parish. And so this is what he would proudly wear, and as he dished out food and everything else. So I want to remember in some of these segments just some of the very simple priests, some of the great priests, some of the good priests that sometimes we've forgotten about and we've taken for granted. And it was by me finding this apron and just thinking of this that I thought of what to do for today. You know, we're a couple days from Easter. And what do we do a couple days before Easter? Well, we dye eggs. So I got my eggs here from Boyer's, and I got my food coloring, and we went and got our things together to dye our eggs. And so we have some eggs being dyed right now, but we got a blue one, we got a green one, we got a red one. It's something we enjoy doing with our kids and our grandchildren and our nephews and our nieces. But there's a religious significance to the egg. First of all, it's a sign of life. And the outer covering of the egg represents the tomb. And Jesus broke out of the tomb on Easter Sunday morning. The saint that I want to focus in of the Passion and the Eastertide is a very special saint at this time. And that's St. Mary Magdalene, or St. Mary of Magdala. Mary Magdalene was a wealthy woman. She lived in the village of Magdala, which was along the Sea of Galilee, near the city of Tiberias. And we have to remember that this is where, when Jesus, after leaving the desert, went to begin his public ministry. He began moving around the Sea of Galilee, and he performed a few miracles there. And it was there where he called his first disciples, the fishermen, you know, Peter and Andrew and James and John. But knowing that Mary Magdalene was also living at the Sea of on the Sea of Galilee at the time, maybe could present the fact that Mary Magdalene knew Jesus very early in his ministry. Now, poor Mary Magdalene, there's a lot of stories said about her. You know, the best story and the only true story is the one that's found in Mark chapter 16, where Jesus expelled from her 7 demons. And later on, she's also going to be accused of being the woman caught in the act of adultery. She's also going to be the prostitute that raided the party that Jesus was at and cried to wash his feet with her tears and then used her hair to dry. Those last 2 stories aren't true. They were fabrications that came out maybe to try and make her a little bit better, but actually they kind of vilified her. But Mary Magdalene, the thing that Jesus wanted to focus on in Mark's Gospel is the fact 7 demons. And 7 demons would represent something truly significant. This woman was deeply troubled. And Jesus gave her peace of mind. Jesus healed her. Jesus forgave her. Jesus removed from her these demons that were bothering her so badly. We believe that Mary and some of her other women friends, who also were very influential at the time, also had money. They must have been some tremendous women of power because, you know, men were all in at the time. So these were some very powerful women, and they devoted their lives to Jesus. So for those 3 years of Jesus' public ministry, they followed him. They provided for his needs. You know, they got food, you know, they cooked, they did a lot of things for Jesus at the time, and Mary Magdalene was always at the forefront. Mary Magdalene, according to ancient tradition, is called an equal to the apostles because Jesus valued her opinion as much as he did that of the 12. Now, a few years ago, we might remember a book that was written by Dan Brown called The Da Vinci Code. Great read, very suspenseful. It's what every author wants to do, every novelist wants to do. They want to sell a bestseller. And Dan Brown, from this theme of using the Catholic Church, sold an awful lot. But in it, you know, he tried to raise Mary Magdalene to a plateau that did not exist. The first was the fact that she was Jesus' lover, then she was Jesus' wife, and why that might be the juicy stuff that some people like to hear, it goes very much against what Jesus would want. Jesus' sole entire purpose was to do the will of God. And the will of God the Father was to redeem the earth from sin. Mary Magdalene nor any other earthly cause would have gotten Jesus' way of that. It's also said at times that in Da Vinci's picture of the Last Supper, you know, the Da Vinci Code, that John, the beloved disciple, who was at Jesus' right with his head laying on Jesus' chest, really wasn't a guy, but rather it was Mary Magdalene, and they kind of put a beard on him to make him look good. But once again, according to the custom of Jewish law, they needed 12 men to celebrate the Passover. So I don't think Jesus would have violated that by having women at the Passover. And so that interesting tidbit from Dan Brown's book doesn't hold weight either. But it does make a good read. Going back to this whole notion of Mary Magdalene being an equal to the apostles, is something that fascinates me and should fascinate us, is that we are all called to do the will of God, which I believe she did, by going out and tending to the needs of Jesus, preaching the gospel message long after he died. And today I want to disperse another myth. Last night, I must admit that I watched Charlie Brown on a video. It was the Easter Beagle. And according to Linus, it's the Easter Beagle that comes and delivers the colored eggs to all the good boys and girls. It was a fun little story to watch. But you know, the creator of the Easter egg, the coloring of the Easter egg, goes back to Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene, as I said, was a very wealthy person, a very influential person. She went to Rome, to the emperor, and complained to the emperor that Pontius Pilate did Jesus a terrible injustice. And because of her influence, she received an audience with the emperor where she got to state her case against what Pontius Pilate did to Jesus, and that the persecution of the followers of Jesus should cease. And the emperor said to Mary Magdalene, "Prove to me that this Jesus Christ is risen from the dead." And she holds up an egg. And she says, "This is the sign of the resurrection, because from this egg, new life comes." And Jesus broke out of the shell. He broke out of the tomb to save us all. And the emperor looks at Mary Magdalene. He says, "You know, you're testing my patience, and this is really ridiculous. Everybody knows what an egg is, and you cannot base an argument that the Son of God rose from the dead through an egg." Well, as Mary Magdalene held that white egg, it became a beautiful shade of red. And the Holy Roman Emperor, not the Holy Roman Emperor, but the Roman Emperor, the Caesar, was very much taken aback by this and filled with great fear. And he had a tremendous respect, although, like I said, it took many, many centuries after that, 2-3 centuries, for them to recognize Christianity. But it was Mary Magdalene, and you can check out a lot of her religious artwork. She's holding an egg. The very special one, she's holding a red egg, where she proved to the emperor that Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. Jesus Christ is the emperor. So as we give you this little bit of a thought on this Easter Sunday evening. We'll try and do all kinds of things to encourage you and help you during this time of social isolation. But you know, as I'm telling you these stories, why don't you turn off the TV? And why don't you pick up the Bible? Go to one of the Gospels. Read Mark's Gospel. Read Matthew's Gospel. Read Luke's Gospel. And don't read it all from cover to cover. Read it a chapter at a time. And take some quiet time and think over it and pray over it. Or maybe you might have a magazine that has religious articles in it. Or you might have a book of a religious nature that you know that you have or someone could share with you. Use this time to expand upon your faith. Use this time to learn who Jesus truly is for you. This time that we cannot go to Mass for Holy Week is not isolation from God. It's isolated from things that keep us too busy from our spending time with God. And so I pray that your white egg becomes a nice shade of red. Happy Easter.